Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we break down the top wide receiver matchups for Week 13. If you have a playoff push, we got some deeper names you could start. And if you like DFS, stay tuned as we break down the studs with the best matchups. All this and more on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, starting right now. And to help me always evaluate the top wide receiver matchups each week, Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down No on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
What is happening? It is very much summer down here. I am sweating like crazy, even though it's only 11 a.m. in the morning, but I'm excited to talk about fantasy. It looks like it's a bit cold over where you are.
Yeah, it's December, folks. It's officially Christmas time. The lights are up. The Christmas tree is up. It gets cold out, but I live in San Diego, so it's not really that cold.
It's never that cold. Yeah.
It's in the 50s, but it's all right. I'm in my sweatshirt. It's totally cool. But you know what? What warms me up? Some good slot versus wide matchups, Ben. That's what I'm talking about. Today, we're breaking down the top matchups in the slot and out wide using our slot versus wide tool over on Razzball.com. It's free, folks. Go check it out on football.razzball.com. We have broken out how many fantasy points each defense allows in the slot and out wide to wide receivers. It's a great tool for DFS. It's a great tool for redraft. Go check it out on razzball.com. Now, if you haven't been tuned in and been checking out the tool, we have some great names this week. Obviously, I want to start off at the top to let everybody know some of the top out wide matchups. Now, you're going to notice some big names, and that's why me and Ben called it audible, and we're going to break down some DFS plays and how we're going to navigate DFS with these studs using DraftKings pricing. So, first off, Miami has one of the best matchups on the week against the Commanders. We don't need to tell you to start Waddle and Tyreek Hill. The Eagles versus the 49ers. 49ers versus the Eagles. Michael Pittman, Adam Thielen, Keenan Allen. All these guys have elite matchups. So, we know their auto starts. We're not saying you're not going to start it, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the DFS plays. We're going to talk a little bit about who you should kind of prioritize. So, Ben, I'm going to share my screen for a second here and kind of go through the DraftKings pricing here. So, obviously, when you're looking at the screen, this is the key part. These guys are all highly priced. They're big time priced. So, you're going to have to essentially either figure out a way to buy down at the running back position, tight end, quarterback, and or you're going to have to – can you see that, by the way, Ben? Is that all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. I can zoom in just a scotch here. Let's get a little aggressive there. All right.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So really to kind of highlight some of these guys first off is that the good news is there's some running backs this week like Zach Moss, who kind of is a cheat code in DFS because of his price point, because of the fact that there's no Jonathan Taylor. I'm trying to buy time as I scroll up to get to the pricing. There we go. Tyreek Hill, 9,600. Jaylen Waddle, 7,600. A.J. Brown, 88. Davante Smith, 73. You get the point. They're all high priced. So, Ben, how did you navigate the lineup this week? Here's my lineup. Where do you differ, you think, the most? And who have you prioritized?
I do like what you've done there. I like having Tua in there. He's got a really good matchup, though I've gone with Brock Purdy against the Eagles. I feel like that combines nicely with a lot of the good matchups for wide receivers we're talking about. You kind of stack them together a little bit. I've got Moss in there as well. Instead of Najee Harris, I've got Ramondre Stevenson against the Chargers. I feel like at $1,600, he's pretty good, but Najee's a very good price there at $5,200. So I got to be honest, didn't think of that. I actually really like what you've done there with that. But Stevenson fits in with what I was trying to do. Instead of Laporta, I have gone with Trey McBride at $4,900. I feel like that's really good price for a guy that I'm ranking as a top 3 tight end. Now, to be fair, tight end landscape's a little bit ugly at the moment. There's kind of a lot of good viable starting options, but the top end's a bit iffy. And then I think I've got the Broncos DST in there as I'm trying to save a little bit of money, but not going over the top. I think Broncos are a top 12 matchup DST-wise for me this week. So I feel like CJ Stroud's starting to make a couple more errors. So let's talk about – and Zach Moss is still in there, of course.
Oh, you got Moss? Okay.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the wide receivers. I've actually got 3 different ways I thought about going with this, but I'll at least go through my favorite way first. So I've got Tyreek Hill in there. I just feel like there's so much upside. 20 points in 8 of the 11 weeks this season. It's a smash matchup. I just feel like you've got to have Hill in there. I don't have Brandon Ayuk. I've got Deebo Samuel saving $1,000 and feeling like he's still getting exposure to that matchup. I understand it is a little bit more of an Ayuk matchup, but I feel like it's very possible in those tight games. They often do go to Deebo a lot, especially given they're not going to be able to use the running backs as much. And I've got Adam Thielen in there at 6,600 because we're talking about PPR with DraftKings. I feel like against the Bucs, really good matchup for slot players. I feel like Thielen, new coaching change. I feel like they're probably going to have to use him. I think they might pass the ball a little bit more. And as my cheapie, I've got A.T. Perry from the Saints, 3,300. Really going deep, trying to get the cheap guys in there.
Now, so if Chris Olave is active, are you going to take him out?
No, because he's still going to be the other out wide guy because Michael Thomas is out and Rashid Shaheed's out. So if Olave's out, I really like that idea. But I did consider the option of flexing away from Tyreek Hill and instead of using Tyreek Hill, using Michael Pittman and Christian Kirk instead of Hill and Perry, and that still fits. So Michael Pittman's obviously got a very good matchup this week. Pittman's against the Titans. Got a really good PPR floor. He's only had 2 games under 14 points this season, and he's a significantly better option than all the other $7,000 plus guys. I like him better than Ayuk. I like him better than Devonta Smith. I like him better than Waddle, and he's cheaper than all of those guys. So you've got the option of taking Hill out, taking Perry out, and putting in Pittman and Kirk. Or you can even take Hill and Thielen out and put in Pittman and Keenan Allen if you really, if you believe Keenan Allen's healthy and you want all those target points.
Yeah, when I was going through all the research, the guy that really stood out to me the most was Adam Thielen as a guy that I'm going to get in my lineups. We talked a little bit about this last week. Yes, the out wide matchup is better against Tampa, but it doesn't matter because Adam Thielen is getting so many targets that he gets most of the out wide targets too. So Jonathan Mingo, we saw last week, that matchup doesn't get any better for Jonathan Mingo, and he got you 60 yards. Like, that's a good game from him. It is not bad, but it's just that's probably the ceiling right now. It is what it is. Bryce Young's not doing well, so it's Adam Thielen all day. Hill is the one that that eats a bunch of your salary, and for DraftKings purposes, you got to be between 150, usually 170 to cash in. So that means you need to get 3 times the value. So if it's 9,600, he needs to get you like 29 points to really give you your money's worth. If you're thinking of it that way. Now, granted, when you're getting to studs, if he gets you 23 points, that's fine. But that's why it's like I'm still figuring out how to navigate it too, because I felt the same way. The Tyreek Tua stack. I did Curtis Samuel on the way back because I wanted to get a piece of that game. Maybe if the game goes how you think, maybe it's a lot of dump offs at the end, dumping it to Curtis Samuel to keep up with Miami. Not sure if I love it, but at the same time, still tinker. But Adam Thielen's the one that really I think we both agree on the most. Now, is there an honorable mention, a guy because right now we got Zach Moss, Stevenson, Najee Harris was the guy I picked. I got Rachaad White and gets Carolina too. But just focusing on the wide receiver piece, is Waddle? Is it because of the price point of Waddle at 70? I think he's 7,200. Does it make any sense? Yeah.
Would you rather take
7,600? Yeah, you're right. And then why would you take him if you could take Ayuk for 72, right?
Yeah.
Is that how you're thinking?
Or Pittman for 71. I've got Pittman ranked higher than Ayuk, higher than Waddle, and higher than Smith, and he's cheaper than all of them. I especially in PPR, he's got such a good PPR floor. Like I said, only 2 games under 14 points this season. You're pretty much guaranteed to get some positive value out of him. And you feel like they might end up passing the ball a reasonable amount. So there's some touchdown upside there as well.
All right, so Ben's going Deebo, Hill, and Thielen with A.T. Perry as his dart throw. I'm going Ayuk, Thielen, and Curtis Samuel as my dart throw this week. So we'll see how that turns out. I did go running backs, though. I did go Rachaad White as my flex this week. I do love the matchup. It's Carolina. The other thing I like is that the Bucs defense is just decimated by injuries. So I'm hoping that the Panthers can show some life make that game a little more interesting. But it'll be 17-14, and this all will be a bad call. So looking forward to all that. Anyway, all right, Ben. Let's get into now we got through that DFS piece. Let's talk a little bit about some of the bold starts. These guys are great matchup plays. Might not be auto starts, but these are guys who have great matchups this week. Why don't you run us through these names?
Sure. So we've got a mixture of slot and out wide guys. The main slot guy is Jayden Reed against the Chiefs. You've also got Parker against the Chargers. Both of the Steelers out wide receivers against the Cardinals. The Panthers out wide guys against the Buccaneers, and the Commanders, basically all of the Commanders wide receivers against the Dolphins. So Jayden Reed's the first guy. He's up against the Chiefs. The Chiefs have been the second most lenient against the slot. Now, to be clear, that's not against slot receivers. That's against guys lining up in the slot. And it's been really interesting because they have been able to shut down a couple of slot wide receivers recently. Keenan Allen only got 4 receptions for 55 yards. Jerry Jeudy only 2 receptions. Christian Kirk blew up against them, but he wasn't really playing as a slot receiver. Zay Jones got injured early on, so he was really playing a lot of the time out wide. But whenever those outside receivers are traveling to the slot, they're managing to make it work against the Chiefs for whatever reason. Jayden Reed, to me, he's a wide receiver 3. He's the best option of the of the Packers wide receivers. But I'm a little bit scared about the amount of usage he's getting. He is their 11 personnel wide receiver. He's not on the field a lot of the time. If they've got 2 tight ends out there, he's not on the field, and that's really limiting his upside. So for me, he's not a good play, but he's someone you can use if you've got caught up in the bye-pocalypse. What do you reckon, Bobby?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's the 6 bye weeks on top of the fact that there are injuries, some notable guys. But unfortunately, going through this process is fun because, like, you see the slot matchup, and you're like, okay, Jayden Reed, here we go. And then you start going through it, and you're like, oh, crap. All right, Keenan Allen, 4 for 55. That's not good. And then I'm like, all right, well, what's the deal? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs have allowed the second fewest yards after the catch per game this season. So that's where Jayden Reed gets a lot of his work right now, is after the catch. And so that worried me. And then also, the Chiefs are a man. They lean man. They actually use Darius Sneed as a shadow corner. We've heard a lot about that over the last few weeks. He's been shadowing top guys. That doesn't affect Reed per se, but it means they play a lot of man. And so Jayden Reed's been a little bit better against zone. So it's just, I think he's a wide receiver 3 because I think the Chiefs are the Chiefs. The Chiefs are like guaranteed 20 to 20 plus points. Packers are home. Jordan Love's playing well, which is good. This is going to be like a nice game for him to see if it's legit or not. I think he's a wide receiver 3, and that's it.
Yep, I'm totally down with that. I totally agree with you there. It really depends on who you want to start him against. And you can always come in on Sunday morning for our start-sit show, and you can see if you should be starting Jayden Reed against certain people. Or you can just ask in the comments right now. Now, Davante Parker's the next guy. He is against the Chargers. The Chargers are 5th easiest matchup for out wide receivers, but they've been generous against all wide receivers this season. Season long, they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers in general. Having said that, Davante Parker, he went 3 for 42 yards last week, and you think, well, that's pretty average. That's his best game since week 2, so I'm not starting him. Would you even touch Parker?
I got this weird thing going on right now. Davante Parker, touch is like a weird way to put it, but I would put my finger on him. Like, I don't know if I would hug him, but I'd be like, hey, Davante, how are you doing today?
Right.
Here's why. So the Chargers, when you're looking at the numbers, the first thing that stands out to me is that Parker is like this. He did his damage early on in his career, air yards. You remember Ryan Fitzpatrick, contested catches. That is not how he's being used. He's actually very good in yards after the catch right now. And if you watched last week, they throw a lot of quick passes to him, and that's where he does his damage. Well, the Chargers defense is 1st in yards after the catch per game. So it just seems like the other problem is Douglas is out. Keyshawn Boutte, whatever his name, is out as well. Of course, we all know Kendrick Bourne is out. Parker has been kind of easing back into the lineup, hasn't got a lot of use, but they have to have him on the field. Now, Bailey Zappi, yes. Is it exciting? I'm thinking more. I like him more as maybe he should be my DFS star. Throw him out there, whatever. Am I starting him? Probably not. But I think he's a guy where I'd rather throw him out there and take the matchup than play Drake London against the Jets. That's how I feel about it. So that's kind of where I feel him as that low end wide receiver 3. The matchup makes sense. He also lines up very similar to Romeo Doubs, who had 5 for 53 and 1 against this defense a couple weeks ago. So we'll see. I think it's worth monitoring. I think it's definitely worth a shot.
Yeah, I think the Douglas thing being out makes a big difference there as well. He goes from being a totally unusable option to someone you can start if you're absolutely desperate. And given the bipocalypse, you might be a little bit desperate. Now, the Steelers are next on our list. Obviously, Deontay Johnson's been back and he's been a little bit up and down. George Pickens has been struggling for a while there against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are the 7th most generous out wide matchup. They've actually been a lot better against all wide receivers this season, but that's primarily because the Cardinals' offense has kind of sucked for much of this season, and so teams haven't really been forced to pass on them. With Kyler Murray back, you have to feel like they're going to be passing a lot more. Though with all the Cardinals pass catchers being injured, it's really hard to know this week if the Cardinals are going to be able to put up any points at all. The Steelers do like to run when they've got the opportunity to, and you can definitely run on the Cardinals. We saw that happen last week with the Rams. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp between them had 7 receptions for 45 yards. In week 10, Drake London went 3 for 36. In week 8, all of the Ravens wide receiver busted. So you go, well, do I really want to start anyone against the Cardinals? Well, some players have had success. We saw Tank Dell go 8 for 149 with a touchdown, and Nico Collins went 7 for 65. That was in Kyler's first game back when they were able to put up a few points. And even Amari Cooper, when Deshaun Watson was still playing, managed to put up 5 for 139 and a touchdown. So in the last few weeks, it's been like an every second week situation where every second week a player will suddenly boom against the Cardinals. Well, this is the second week, so maybe Deontay or George Pickens will be involved there. Where do you have them ranked, Bobby?
I struggle because it doesn't seem like the offense is going to support both these guys on the same week. Like it almost feels like pick your guy and you just have to have a hunch on who's going to go off, because it's not Kenny Pickett hasn't done enough to support, because Muth went off. You know they were going to use both running backs, and the problem is now it's like there isn't enough on a very bad passing offense. I know Mike Sullivan's doing a little more. Matt Canada is gone. Thank you, Lord. But at the same time, it just doesn't seem like these guys pop off together. So the question is, all right, if you're going to pick, who is it going to be? Well, when you're looking at the numbers, the first thing that stands out is that the Cardinals are going to be down 2 corners that they've been relying on for most of the season. Now Starling Thomas is out. Antonio Hamilton is out. That is going to impact their pass secondary. The other thing is the Steelers are home, which I always like for the Steelers. The Cardinals are an air yards defense, and that leans George Pickens. Now, Deontay still gets a decent amount of air yards, but George Pickens is the air yards guy. And Pickens would get, when you look at the lineup data, he's going to line up against the backup cornerback the most without Sterling. Sterling Thomas is out this week. So that means that Pickens is going to get a backup corner in an air yards defense. The team, by the way, the Cardinals play a ton of zones, so it's not going to be that much one-on-one. But I feel horrible, but I lean George Pickens, but I feel like they're both wide receiver 3s. So I like Thomas. Deontay Johnson's just looked better. But last week, if you look at the numbers, it was slightly Pickens. So it just seems like 5 for 55. Here we come. Super exciting. But I'm going to lead George Pickens over Deontay Johnson, both wide receiver 3s at best in this matchup.
Interesting. I've gone the other way. I've got DJ a little bit higher. I know he struggled against the Packers, Browns, and Bengals, but the Packers, Browns, and Bengals have been pretty tough matchups for the most part for wide receivers. Not so much the Bengals, but certainly the Packers and Browns. He's looked pretty good compared to Pickens since he came back. Having said that, the first week he was back, Pickens did put up 100 yards, but he hasn't had more than 4 receptions since then. It is very much a Pickens-style game, but the floor is so low compared to Johnson's that it's a bit scary to start him. So I feel like Pickens has the upside. He's the better DFS play. In redraft, I'd rather start Johnson, but they're both wide receiver 3s for me anyway. Now, speaking of guys where you don't really want to start either of them, it's the Carolina wide receivers. They are up against the Bucs. The Bucs are the 8th best out wide matchup, but they've allowed the 4th most points to all wide receivers this season if we add everything up. So they have been a pretty generous matchup. We talked about Thielen earlier. We do know that Thielen's going to be moved around everywhere. He is going to be involved, but Mingo and Chark are still kind of options. They may benefit from the change of play calling. We're seeing Mingo on the injury report with an Achilles, but he's looked okay. Would you start either of these guys, Bobby?
I think we kind of addressed it earlier. I would love to. I would love to get really amped up. Unfortunately, we have to be honest with the numbers. The numbers get you to a certain point, and then you have to be kind of like, all right, what's the actual situation? Last week, it doesn't get much better than the last week matchup for Jonathan Mingo, and he was fine. He was actually good. Might have given you a little bang for your buck in DFS because he was priced at like 30,000, but not for redraft. It's Adam Thielen. And we talk about this why. When you actually look at the numbers, Adam Thielen gets so many targets that he actually has more out wide targets than anybody else on the roster because he gets so many targets. So he's the matchup only. The other thing that I love is that Jamel Dean is out. Delonte David's out. Devin White is out. The other backup linebacker to those guys is out. So it's going to be a lot of in middle of the field type guys are out. Then no Tommy Tremble, who backs up Hayden Hurst. Now they're down to their third string tight end. That's another notable inkling here. And the other thing, too, is when you look at the Tampa Bay Bucks, what do? They allow a shit ton of yards after the catch. That's Adam Thielen. That's the slot matchup. I'm not worried about Mingo. I'm not worried about DJ Chark. It's Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, get him in your DFS lineups.
Yep, totally agree. Chark's just not getting enough targets. You'd have to be really desperate to start him in any situation. I don't really mind Mingo too much. We've seen him start to come on a little bit. He is a rookie, and we do know that rookies in the second half of the season can start to hit a little bit, especially if there's a change in play calling or if Bryce Young, another rookie, starts to get better. I'm in a situation where I might need to start him in a 14-team league because Michael Thomas is on IR, Khalil Shakir is on bye. I'm like, do I start him or A.T. Perry? This is where we're at. You've got to be in that situation if you're even thinking about Jonathan Mingo. But outside a situation where you're really desperate at wide receiver, can't imagine starting either of these guys. Now, the Commanders wide receivers are the last ones with a good matchup, but guys that you don't necessarily need to start. Terry McLaurin has been pretty poor this season, all things considered, yet to get over 100 yards in a game. Jahan Dotson's been really up and down, was poor at times, but has had a couple of boom games. Curtis Samuel suddenly came out of nowhere and had an amazing game last week. They're against the Dolphins, who were 10th against out wide and 11th against the slot, making all three of these guys viable, interesting options. Bobby, you starting any of these guys? And if so, what's the situation?
Just thinking about Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard, I immediately was like, all right, well, it probably makes most sense to look at Curtis Samuel. After last week's game, it probably makes most sense to start Curtis Samuel. However, when you start looking at the numbers, if you look at the guys who played well with Jalen Ramsey back, it was Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams. And those guys are studs. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that Terry McLaurin is a stud, but if you're looking at the matchup itself, the guys who have performed well, Terry McLaurin mirrors, those kind of players. He plays mostly on the outside, but it just hasn't been he has not been Sam Howell's guy. And he's too inconsistent. And I just don't want to play him knowing that Jalen Ramsey's getting healthier and Xavier Howard's back. And it just doesn't make sense to me. So I guess I'm fading them, but there's someone's going to play well, right? It's just Miami's allowed. I think maybe it's because of the game flow, how Miami good offensively they are. But if you look at the numbers, they give up points. So it's going to happen. And Sam Howell's been very good. And even in garbage time, he gets you. He's a good garbage time quarterback, and that's all I can ask for. So that's why I lean Curtis Samuel. He just seems like the logical play here. Seems like with the game flow and everything. But honestly, what's your thoughts on McLaurin? Are you starting McLaurin, Dotson? How would you rank these three guys?
I don't really love any of them, but I feel like they're all still solid plays. McLaurin's at least a wide receiver 2 for me, simply because he does have that boom potential. I said he hadn't got over 100 yards this season, and he hasn't, but he's done it 14 times in the previous 4 seasons. So he does have big game potential, but he hasn't had more than 5 receptions since week 7. He's only got 2 touchdowns on the season. In the red zone, he's had 7 targets for no touchdowns. You feel like that probably will regress. Generally, he's had better numbers than that, and they've been getting a lot of passing touchdowns. So you'd think that the upside is there in a possible shootout out against Miami in a situation where there might be garbage time. For me, someone that's really hard to sit because of so many players on bye weeks. Jahan Dotson, on the other hand, he's been actually pretty good in good matchups. He had 19 targets across the 2 Philly games. He had 8 targets against the Pats. He had 7 targets against the Cards. He's also got 8 red zone targets, which is pretty good for a clear wide receiver 2 or 3 in his team. Not to mention the fact that Logan Thomas has been taking a lot of red zone targets earlier, and that's kind of gone towards the wide receivers lately. So he's got touchdown upside. He's got big game upside, but I don't feel good about starting him. He's right on that wide receiver 3 cusp. I've actually got him and Curtis Samuel right next to each other. Can't decide which way around to play them.
Yeah.
Samuel obviously had that big game. He's had 9 red zone targets, which leads the team, despite missing a game and having limited snaps for 2 weeks. So he is actually the red zone guy, which is really odd. But I feel like check downs are a possibility. So I've got it ordered McLaurin and then Dotson and Samuel really close to each other. And I'm happy to start any of them because there's so much upside.
It seems like it's almost like Russian roulette, where it's like you spin in it and you hope when you pull it, it's like, that's the one. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason to who's going to be the guy each week. It could even be Logan Thomas because Miami's soft against tight ends. I don't know. But I hear you. All right, let's move on. Let's go.
It's a mess. It's a mess. Don't know what to do. It's a mess. So let's hit some downgrades. So look, there's a couple of guys here that are right on the cusp, and you've got to decide if you're going to start them. We've got Drake London against the Jets. What is up, Jamie? We've got Drake London against the Jets. We've got Christian Watson against the Chiefs. We've got Garrett Wilson against the Falcons. And we've got the 2 Texans guys against the Broncos. So let's start off with Drake London. Drake London, very much a wide receiver 3 for me against the Jets. It's the worst out wide matchup. I am trying to avoid him if possible. It's just way too easy to run on the Jets. I know that Waddle and Hill had over 100 yards each last week. I know that Khalil Shakir had over 100 yards the week before, but it's such a great running back matchup, and we know that the Falcons will take any excuse to run. So what are you doing with Drake London?
I got to tell you, the Waddle thing just drove me up a freaking wall, dude. Like, so the matchup is the worst for outside receivers. Waddle gets like 90% of his production out wide. Last week, he gets 4 catches for 73 yards from the slot. He had 130 yards receiving from the slot all season heading into that game. So obviously Mike McDaniel, and this is the other thing, good players, when they start talking a little and they be the squeak, because Waddle made a comment. He's like, it was kind of passive aggressive, but he said, yeah, when Hill was out, I kind of thought, that's when I'll get my opportunities. Like, kind of saying like, hey, I only get opportunities when Hill's out. And sure enough, they moved him around. They got him into the slot. He didn't run a ton of routes there, but he got a lot of production from the slot. And I like to see that. It gives me a lot more confidence that Mike McDaniel, I know this is not what we're talking about, but it makes me feel like, okay, it wasn't because the matchup analysis was wrong. It was because the Dolphins did something different, which is just another humbling reminder. Numbers can only get you so damn far. But anyway, Drake London, I do not think that's going to happen for him. I don't think all of a sudden, because the biggest reason why is because they use a ton of 2 tight end sets. Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts are so involved, it's hard to get him into the slot to be the primary slot guy. So I don't see that happening. I'm not going to – 7th fewest yards to wide receiver 1s this season. That's yards per game. That's for the Jets. 4th fewest pass attempts faced for the Jets against number 1 wide receivers. I'm just going to pass. I'm not going to – especially if I'm trying to get into the playoffs. London's a wide receiver 4 now. Why would I put him as a wide receiver 3 in a tough matchup?
Yeah, agree. It's really hard to feel like you can start him. It's really only because he's the clear wide receiver 1 in Atlanta that I even consider him. But it's the kind of game where you feel like all their wide receivers combined will get like 5 targets in this game. Okay, Mike Evans is second on our list. He has been fantastic. We talked about him last week, and we were saying, it's against the Colts. This is actually technically a really tough out wide matchup. What do you do? And I said, well, here's all the reasons you shouldn't start him. But he's Mike Evans, so he's a wide receiver 1, and you should definitely start him. And he was the wide receiver 1 last week. He had 6 receptions for 70 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. And that's what Mike Evans does. He gets a lot of touchdowns. He had 9 touchdowns this season so far. He's had 6 in the last 6 weeks. I really can't see any reason why you would ever sit Mike Evans these days. He's pretty much matchup proof. There's just so much touchdown upside. He will have off weeks. We know he'll have off weeks, especially against New Orleans. Every time he faces Marshawn Lattimore, he sucks. But in general, he's someone that you just have to start because even though he's not getting a lot of receptions, he can make big plays and he gets a lot of touchdowns. And you have to feel like that this is an opportunity for Baker Mayfield to get going a little bit against a really poor Panthers defense. What do you reckon, Bobby?
Yeah, it's also all the injuries too. The Panthers secondary, it's a combination of the Panthers run defense is so bad that teams don't need to throw a lot. And it just seems like when teams need to throw, they could throw easily against the Panthers. All their best cornerbacks are banged up. J.C. Horn might come back this week. Not sure if he's going to be activated off IR. They're banged up either way. And the first game back, I'm not scared. The other thing is, historically speaking, the Panthers have had guys like big-time cornerbacks, like James Bradbury for a long time was there before he moved on. He was pretty good against Mike Evans as well. They don't have that corner. And the other thing is, when you look at the Panthers against the good receivers, they faced Tyreek Hill, Michael Pittman, CeeDee Lamb. They all did fine. They all played well. And this season, it's not a 1A, 1B situation like years past. It's Mike Evans. For some reason, Baker Mayfield is like, hey, Mike Evans. I feel like Mike Evans must have did something that we don't know about to Baker Mayfield. And I'm not saying anything fun, no funny business here. I'm just saying, hey, got him a nice house, got him a car, because Chris Godwin is a nobody now. And Tom Brady used to prioritize Chris Godwin, and he's a Hall of Famer. So something's going on in the water down there. I don't know. But Mike Evans, not sitting him. He's been very consistent. And the good receivers get there versus the Panthers.
Yeah. And that Chris Godwin thing's interesting because there have been reports coming out this week that they've said we are going to get Chris Godwin going this week, and then he's barely practiced, and we don't even know if he's going to play. And if Chris Godwin sits, that's even more reason to start Mike Evans. Having said that, Chris Godwin is interesting this week.
What about Trey Palmer if Chris Godwin is out?
That's a good question. I don't really think that they feel like they need to use their other wide receivers or their wide receivers in general. So if Godwin's out, who we're barely starting, I probably wouldn't start Palmer, even though he's been used a little bit when they had to have their other guys covered. Would you start Palmer?
Maybe Cade Otton week?
It feels like it could be a Cade Otton week. Look, it's definitely going to be a Rachaad White week. It definitely should be a Rachaad White week.
Yeah. Well, I have White in my DFS lineup. They can't run the football, but if you can't run against Carolina, then this is the week. If you have Rachaad White and you've been with him all year, he's been very good too. So if Godwin's even limited, historically have seen when you start taking away wide receiver targets, they all somehow funnel back to the running back. So I think that's going to be key there too. The other thing is this is a very good slot matchup though. The Panthers are one of the very few teams in our metric that allow 50% of their fantasy points to wide receivers from the slot. That's where Trey Palmer plays the most. So if Godwin is out, maybe I think it's just a DFS play. He's probably the cheapest option on DFS. If you want to get Tyreek Hill in your lineup, you need to buy down. Trey Palmer might be a sleeper in that matchup.
Yeah, he might be a good replacement for my A.T. Perry shout if Chris Olave definitely plays.
There you go.
I really like White this week. White's my running back 7 this week. He really is a very good play. So let's talk about Christian Watson and I guess Romeo Doubs by extension, but mainly Christian Watson. Finally started to get going last week, and now he faces the Chiefs, who are the second worst out wide matchup. Now, he does go to the slot occasionally, but that is really where Jayden Reed spends most of his time. And Watson's just been so bad this season. It's a tough matchup. It's an easy reason to avoid him. He's a really low wide receiver 3 for me at best. Romeo Doubs, by the same token, has been really up and down. It's just been hard for the Packers to get all 3 guys going, and there doesn't seem to be a clear number 1 like there was with Watson last season when he really broke out. So Doubs has touchdown upside, but I wouldn't start Doubs at all. Are you starting either of the Packers?
The thing is, this is the game where I would rather sit back and watch, because Jordan Love has turned a corner, but we've seen so many times that these guys turn corners against easy matchups, and then they play the legit team, and then reality check sets in. So I actually where I'm in shallow, like 10-team league, I've picked up Jordan Love and stashed him because I'm interested to see how this works. So Christian Watson looked very good last week, but the key for this game is that the Chiefs limit air yards, and that's where Watson makes his money. Look at the studs. These are studs who all basically pretty much underperformed against the Chiefs. Davante Adams, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Cortland Sutton, all were well below their season averages against this defense. So if you need a wide receiver 3 and you have to start Christian Watson, it is what it is. But I want to see them do it against a good defense first before I just buy in.
Yep, totally agree. I think there's a non-zero chance L'Jarius Sneed follows him around as well, and that would be terrible news for him because he's been a pretty good shutdown corner of late as well.
Yes.
So let's talk about Garrett Wilson. A lot of people kind of would have drafted Garrett Wilson, second, third round this year, and he's been a real disappointment, not really due to anything he's done wrong. It's just their quarterback play has been atrocious. Now they've turned to Tim Boyle, and like Zach Wilson before him, he's still trying to force the ball to Garrett Wilson with limited success. He takes on the Falcons. They're the 6th worst out-wide matchup this season, but they are the 8th best slot matchup, which is interesting because Garrett Wilson does find his way to the slot occasionally, especially with Allen Lazard expected to be active again this week. It is possible Wilson gets a little bit more time in the slot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and if they try to use him a little bit more there to make it a little bit easier for Boyle to get to him. The Falcons are a really difficult run matchup, which, given the Jets might need to chase the game, might mean that we do get a little bit more passing than we would usually get outside the Jets. It's going to be a tough game for Breece Hall to get going, and that could mean a lot of Wilson targets. And against the Falcons, it does tend to be a lot of tight end targets. So Tyler Conklin becomes interesting this game as well. For me, Wilson is a really low wide receiver too. Bobby, you starting him in your leagues?
Yeah, you have to. I honestly, this is one of those where he gets 10 targets a game, and you just brought up a good point. He about 1/3 of his fantasy points this season have come from the slot. So that's at least he plays enough inside. They've been good to him. The volume's there. At least it wasn't like Davante Adams earlier midway through the season where he got like 3 targets. You're like, what are we doing? They're giving him the double-digit targets every game. So at least the coaching staff, we have to give him credit. You could actually blame the quarterback play for this one because the coaching staff's like, just throw it to the guy. Just get it to him. And the quarterback's like, all right, we'll give it our shot. So 6 teams on bye, double-digit targets, enough slot usage. He's a go for me this week.
Yeah. Here's a trivia question for you. Where do you think Garrett Wilson lies in most targets among all wide receivers in the league?
3.
He's fifth. Fifth overall, and he's played less games than 2 of the guys above him. It's absolutely ridiculous. He's got 113 targets. It's only Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, bizarrely, ahead of him. It's really strange. He's just getting so many targets. It's just their atrocious passes.
I learned this about a month and a half ago that you can't look at the numbers for Garrett Wilson because, number one, he gets about a 90% target share of the out wide production. Like, it's his target share might not say 90%, but if you look at his production versus the other wide receivers, he's getting probably 75% of the fantasy point production. So when you look at the wide match, if they allow 20 fantasy points, he gets like 75% of that. He's still a wide receiver too at the worst most weeks. So that's why I'm just over it. They just give him so many targets. It's not even worth fading him.
It's absolutely crazy. Like, Xavier Gibson has been their wide receiver too, and he's getting like 2 targets a week. It's just insane. They're just not using anybody else. It's all Garrett Wilson. That doesn't make it a good reason to start him, though. It's still a tricky matchup. Yeah. Now, let's talk about the Texans. Now, the Texans have been a bit of a cheat code of late. CJ Stroud's been good, but he has been giving a lot more turnovers of late. They take on the Broncos juggernaut, who the start of the season were absolutely atrocious. They're now the 4th toughest out wide matchup across the league in the last 6 weeks, that is, I believe. So how do we make sense of this? Well, the Broncos have shut down a lot of good wide receivers of late. Amari Cooper went 2 for 16. Jordan Addison, 3 for 44. Stephon Diggs, 3 for 34. The Chiefs across 2 games got 1 touchdown through the air against them. That's including Travis Kelce. And no Packers wide receiver got over 30 yards. The Broncos have all of a sudden worked it all out in defense. Now, to be fair, their run defense still sucks. They're the most generous run defense across the league. And we do know that they've managed to get Devin Singletary going for the Texans. So it doesn't mean that this is going to be a situation where the Texans can't do anything. But it's suddenly a really hard matchup for Dell or Collins. Are they still must starts for you, Bobby?
So my sit of the week is Tank Dell. I basically talked a little bit about this in my article this week. I talked a little bit about how the one thing that they do very well now, the Broncos, is they eliminate air yards. And that's where Tank Dell does his damage. He's the vertical runner. Nico Collins is now the yards after the catch guy. You see him running a lot of slants. He gets the ball. He's actually 10th in the NFL in yards after the catch per reception. So that's where you beat the Broncos. So my bold take this week is Nico over Tank because of that metric. The other thing is Tank Dell kind of mirrors Stephon Diggs. If you look at the way they line up, if you look at the way they are used, air yards versus yards at the catch per reception. So I kind of feel like, and plus now he's dealing with a knee injury. I think, listen, Tank Dell's still a wide receiver 3. He's so hot. He's probably still going to be started. But I would say fade him in DFS, and I actually lean Nico this week because of that.
Yeah, look, that makes sense. I find Tank Dell really difficult. My instinct is the same as yours. And I was wondering what other people across the industry were thinking. So I went on to Fantasy Pros and looked at some of the most accurate rankers, and it's all over the place. People have got him as high as a top 5 wide receiver this week, and other people have got him outside the top 24. It's absolutely all over the place. No one really knows what to do with Tank Dell at the moment. But we have seen that when he plays tough matchups, he really struggles. Against the Raiders in week 1, admittedly, he went 3 for 34. Week 4 against the Steelers, 1 for 16. Against the Falcons in week 5, 3 for 57. Against the Panthers in week 8, 3 for 16. And we could argue, oh, well, you know, in the last 4 weeks, he's finally worked it out. He's got 95 PPR points across the last 4 weeks. Therefore, you can't sit him. But the reality is they were all pretty good matchups for a wide receiver. I think he's a far scarier start than we're giving him credit for. I think there's a lot of players that you should be starting over him. All the guys we talked about in DFS as being good, strong stud starts, you definitely should be starting over Tank Dell, and that's not the case most weeks. Nico Collins, sorry, go ahead.
Can I just cut you off? Sorry, let's talk about that though. I think that's a good discussion because let's see. Look at some of the wide receiver. Like the Jags receivers, you have Kirk and Ridley. Would you start those 2 guys over Tank Dell this week?
I personally wouldn't because I don't love it. Oh, actually, I'd start Ridley over him. I would start Ridley, but I wouldn't start Kirk. I think Ridley's got a little bit more upside than Kirk at the moment with Zay Jones back. So I would start Ridley, but I wouldn't start Kirk over him. I just think Dell has significantly more upside at the moment.
All right, Cortland Sutton.
Cortland Sutton has the touchdown upside, but I'm still starting Dell.
Okay. Last one. By the way, I got to tell you, I was going to say Amari Cooper just because Joe Flacco. I just wanted to mention Joe Flacco once on the show. Everybody just do yourself a favor. Go back to 2022 and look at Joe Flacco's game logs. He is not washed. I don't know why the narrative is that he's washed, but the guy's threw for 285 yards in 3 of 4 games. So at least there'll be a little more juice in the matchup. Just saying, but I won't say Amari Cooper. Let's do a fun one. We just talked, let's say, I was going to say Terry McLaurin, but we kind of know. What about Garrett Wilson?
Garrett Wilson's interesting, but I've got him below Terry McLaurin, I think. I'd start Dell over him. I still have Dell in that situation where I feel like you're just going to regret sitting him against a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys where there is some upside, but it's easy to see them having a low floor. And I think Dell's clearly got a lower floor than most weeks, but if he's got more upside than someone, I'm probably going to start Dell.
Okay. Is there any bold guys that you can think of off the top of your head? Sorry to put you on the spot. Do you have a bold take? I'm just curious.
Simply look. I think the most interesting guy for me that I'd consider starting over him is probably Devonta Smith and Deebo Samuel, who are both wide receiver 2s on their team, but they've both got fantastic matchups. I also think Jamar Chase is an interesting one this week where you can make an argument that you should be starting Chase because he's going to get a lot of targets. They're clearly targeting him depending on whether T. Higgins is back or not. So I think that's probably where it gets really interesting as to which one you start.
Okay. All right. Thanks for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, all good. That was fun. So let's talk about Nico Collins real briefly. So Nico Collins has actually been better in tough matchups. Against those Ravens we talked about, he put up 6 for 80. Against the Steelers, who are a pretty tough wide receiver matchup, we saw 1 for 16 by Tank Dell. But Nico Collins put up 7 receptions for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was absolutely insane. He does have the ability to go pretty well in tough starts. as Bobby said, this is a better situation for him than Dell. For me, he's a wide receiver too. I've still got him slightly below Dell simply because of the variance that we're having in what he's doing. I feel like there's a lot more accessible downside for him than for Dell. I'm also a little bit scared about the possible return of Noah Brown. Noah Brown probably takes over from Robert Woods, but it wouldn't surprise me if he also lowers Nico Collins' snaps just a little bit. We haven't seen all four Texans wide receivers healthy since week 1, so we have no idea exactly what this is going to look like. But the fact that Noah Brown might be healthy is another reason to feel a little bit sketchy about these guys.
The only thing I would say to push back on that is that because of Tank Dell's injury, they might actually limit Tank Dell a little bit because of the knee. So that might make a little more sense. But the other thing, too, is Dalton Schultz is out. So maybe there is some 4 wide receiver set thing going on. I don't know. I doubt it, but it'd be great if they did that. It's tough to do that. There's not a lot of teams that use a lot of 4 wide. The other thing I want to note, too, is that he plays really good at home. If you look at the games that his splits home and away, his home matchups, he is very good. So if you look at I'll just run through it really quick because it's probably the best way to do it. But they are playing at home, just confirming that. So that just make sure I'm correct. All right. So Indianapolis Colts, 27 points. Pittsburgh Steelers, 35 points. 12 points against the Saints, 14 and 13 Arizona, and 23 against Jacksonville. So he's been hot at home. So and I believe he's home this week, right? Just want to confirm that.
Yeah, he is home.
Okay. Yeah, so that's another reason why I like him a little more too.
Yeah, that's true. I actually really like that. I didn't even think of that one. That's good stats there.
Thank you.
So it's that time of the week where I take you through my weekly streamers and stashes. If you haven't been reading the article, then you've been missing out on all my great tips for Thursday Night Football. I seem to just be hitting on Thursday Night Football every week at the moment. So you missed out there. Having said that, still got plenty of other options available. My favorite quarterback streamer of the week, Russell Wilson. I nearly forgot what team he plays for. The Broncos have faced top half defenses every week for the last 2 months, and he's really looked like he's struggled, but he's still the QB 14 on the season, and he finally gets an opportunity in a bit of a shootout against the Texans. So I really like Russell Wilson this week. If you are struggling with Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields or Joshua Dobbs being out, then Wilson's a great option for you to bring in. That is if you can't use a Brock Purdy. And if you're desperate in a deeper league, don't mind Gardner Minshew either. For the running backs, Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. Talked about Najee Harris recently. The Cardinals, their run defense is atrocious. They allowed 287 yards and 3 touchdowns to the Rams to their running backs alone last week. So that means that Warren and Najee are both viable starts. They're both running backs twos for me. I like getting them in my lineups. We've already talked about Adam Thielen. He's someone that I've got in here, along with Deontay Johnson and Curtis Samuel. I talked about all of them. And, of course, my favorite tight end, as it has been for the last 2 weeks, is David Njoku. Now, I don't know how Joe Flacco coming in is going to affect that, but we did talk about Joe Flacco still having the ability to air it out. And I feel like this is a situation where we could see a surprising amount of passing yards for Cleveland, and that's got to help Njoku as well as Cooper and everyone else involved in that passing offense. Bobby, what do you got going on the Razzball website?
Yeah, I already post my weekly running back starts and wide receiver starts articles. We are breaking down the slot first wide, of course, today. And then we have the Sunday Live Start Sit show every Sunday. So we're breaking that down. But I do want to just talk about this really quick because you just brought up a good point. Like last season, Flacco played weeks 1 through 3 for the New York Jets. And I think this is important to break down because Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore is on a lot of waiver wires now because of the whole debacle with the quarterback. Amari Cooper is going to be probably brought up a bunch. David Njoku is probably if you have David Njoku, you probably are rostering 2 tight ends because you're not sure what the deal is. So I'm just curious to see how this broke down. So I'm pulling this up now for us. But the Jets last year, weeks 1 through 3, Garrett Wilson played very well, 18 receptions, 214 yards, 2 touchdowns the first 3 weeks. And I think you logically just insert Amari Cooper into that role. So if you're looking at 70 yards and a touchdown potentially in 2 out of 3 games, that's not too bad for Amari Cooper. Corey Davis had 10 catches for 187 yards. Elijah Moore, ironically enough, 12 catches, 139 yards. So you're looking at probably 4 catches for 45 yards a game. That's a nice floor at PPR, but he also has more of a prominent role with the Browns than he did with the Jets back then. I was curious. Let's see about the tight ends. Tyler Conklin. Here you go. This is going to help you with your start. He had 18 catches in 3 games with Joe Flacco, 140 yards and a touchdown. For tight ends, that's all we need. Give me 5 for 50. I'll be it all day at that. That's all you need. So I think the Njoku's going to be good. Plus, remember Flacco historically has been really good with tight ends, even back in his days with the Ravens. So I think that's something there. So I like the Njoku call. I'm excited. I also think that opens things up for that Rams game. No Denzel Ward this week. Make sure you join us Sunday Live. We break down all the injuries, but I think the Denzel Ward injury should open things up as well. I think that game's going to be a little more fun now with Flacco. Because the other thing with the rookie was that he's mobile, so they ran a little more, and that just kills the clock, right? Flacco's not running anywhere, folks. So at least they'll sling it a little more, open up the passing game a little more, and I think Matthew Stafford might have a little more success this week. That's my bold take. Rams, Browns, a little more fun. Start Amari Cooper. We'll have a great time with that. All right, that's all we got for today, folks. That was our slot versus wide points per game allowed pool analysis. I am just blanking on what we were calling that thing because I can't find the banner. That's how you do terrible podcasting, folks. There we go. Top matchups for week 13, slot versus wide analysis. There it is. It just took me a while. Make sure you follow Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down. No O. Go to his website. Go check him out. He's everywhere. He writes for Razzball, but he does great work everywhere. His rankings are on point. We're glad to have him on board. Make sure you follow me at Bobby LaMarco. I'm just always around, just putzing around, answering questions and stuff. Make sure you jump on. I also do the slot versus wide on Reddit, folks. If you have questions, go jump on Reddit. We do it every Saturday, the AMA, and then we do the Sunday Live on Sunday. So we're always there for you. So make sure you join us. Once again, we are out of here, folks.
Peace.